It was 11:47 at night when the office finally stopped pretending to be alive. The lights hummed, the heating vents whispered, and somewhere far away a cleaning robot rolled down the hallway like a lonely ghost. Everyone had gone home hours ago, but I was still here, the last heartbeat in a building made of glass and pressure. 3 monitors glowed in front of me, painting my face in pale light. PowerPoint slides, financial forecasts, lines of code that no one else understood but me. The presentation for tomorrow's meeting was open on my main screen, a deck worth $200 million. $200 million, and still, I was eating vending machine pretzels for dinner. My name is Chelsea Drake, Director of Operations, Velian Systems. That's what the signature under my email says anyway. In truth, my job description is simpler. I make sure this place doesn't fall apart. If the servers crash, it's me. If a contract goes wrong, me again. If Adrian Cole, our CEO, promises something impossible to a client, guess who makes it happen? My keyboard clacked in a rhythm I hated. It sounded like surrender. The message came at 11:52. My phone vibrated once, sharp enough to make me flinch. Adrian Cole, the golden boy himself. Need the Strathmore presentation reworked by 8 a.m. Make it visionary. You know what I like. That was it. No greeting, no thanks. I stared at the text, waiting for the words to rearrange into something human. They didn't. I leaned back in my chair and looked through the glass wall toward his office. Dark now, of course. He'd left at 6 p.m. to network, which usually meant cocktails, flattery, and stories about his vision. His corner office had a perfect view of the Chicago skyline. Mine faced the server room, where the air always smelled faintly of dust and metal. When I first joined Velian, I believed in him. Adrian could talk about innovation like it was poetry. He knew how to make investors fall in love, how to sell an idea before it existed. But somewhere along the way, I realized I was the one making those ideas real while he collected the applause. He once introduced me to a venture capitalist as the logistics brain. I smiled politely while he laughed. Back then, I thought he meant it as a compliment. Now I know it was a way of keeping me small, a magician behind the curtain, useful but invisible. A Slack notification popped up on my screen. Our CFO had uploaded another final version of the quarterly numbers. I skimmed through them and felt my stomach twist. A mistake, a decimal point in the wrong place. Left alone, it could wreck the valuation we were about to pitch. I corrected it silently. Again. I had fixed so many of his mistakes that I couldn't remember which ones were mine anymore. Outside, snow drifted against the windows like static. The city below looked quiet, unaware that a handful of sleepless people in tall buildings were deciding the worth of millions. My reflection in the glass stared back, tired eyes, hair pulled into a loose bun, a blouse with a coffee stain that refused to die. Somewhere on my desk, an employee recognition plaque caught the glow of my screen. Excellence in support, it read. Support, not leadership, not vision, just support. My throat tightened. I opened the presentation again, scrolling through slide after slide with Adrian's name stamped across them in bold letters. Strathmore Freight Partnership, a vision by Adrian Cole. Every graph, every model, every operational diagram mine. When I first built the algorithm behind our logistics platform, it felt like magic. It learned from patterns, predicted demand, cut shipping costs by 30%. It could have changed the industry. Adrian had called it our breakthrough. Then 2 weeks later, it became his vision. I rubbed my temples. The room felt too bright, too empty. My phone buzzed again. Adrian, also make sure the slides look sexy. Investors love a little drama. I laughed quietly, a sharp, humorless sound. Sexy logistics, I muttered. Sure, why not? The laugh died quickly. I reached for my coffee, cold, bitter, stale. My pulse was starting to race, that familiar mix of adrenaline and resentment that kept me going night after night. My eyes drifted to the open folder on my desktop labeled Velian Shared. Inside it were years of files. Project maps, legal documents, code structures, client communication, all the invisible architecture of this company. I hesitated for a moment, then reached into my bag for a small silver USB drive. I plugged it. Copied everything, not out of spite, not yet, just instinct. A quiet insurance policy. As the progress bar crawled across the screen, I whispered to myself, just in case. That's what I always said when I did something I couldn't explain. Just in case. The copy finished. I ejected the drive and slipped it into my notebook. The monitors flickered for a second, maybe the power grid struggling under the weight of another storm, or maybe just the universe winking at me. I looked at Adrian's office again, empty but still smug somehow, the awards on his shelf catching the moonlight like trophies stolen from someone else's game. Maybe I was just tired. Maybe this was nothing. But something inside me had clicked tonight, quiet and irreversible. For 3 years, I had convinced myself that being indispensable was the same as being valued. That if I worked harder, fixed faster, stayed longer, someone would finally see me. But nobody sees the foundation. They only notice it when it cracks. I turned back to my computer and added one last line to the presentation. Small, hidden, a data point buried in the notes section that no one would notice unless they looked very, very closely. Then I sat back, staring at the screen, at the empire I had built for someone else. My hands were trembling, but my voice was steady when I whispered, "You want visionary, you'll get it." Outside, the snow thickened. The whole city seemed to disappear into white noise. And for the first time, I didn't feel invisible at all. I saved the deck and let my wrists rest on the cool edge of the desk. The building hummed around me like a giant machine waiting for orders. Somewhere above me, an elevator moved by itself, a midnight shuttle ferrying no one. I watched the blue bar on a server monitor inch forward and thought about all the nights I had spent here pretending that endurance was the same as power. I opened Slack to send a final note to the sales lead. He had asked for a miracle timeline again. I typed a careful sentence about resource constraints, predictable capacity, contingency windows. Then I deleted the word miracle and replaced it with achievable. It felt cleaner in my mouth. The clock hit 12:32. I stood, stretched, and walked to the kitchen for water. The refrigerator light was too bright. Inside, someone had left a bottle of sparkling rosé with a sticky note that said "For the win tomorrow." I almost laughed. It felt like a party thrown before the guest of honor had decided to show up. On the way back to my desk, I paused beside the glass case outside Adrian's office. It held the magazine cover that changed everything for him. There he was in a navy suit, jaw angled just so, eyes bright with the promise of disruption. The headline crowned him with a word I had once loved: visionary. I remembered the day that feature came out. He had brought the issue to my desk, thumped it down like a trophy, and said, "We did it." I smiled then. Tonight I just saw the blank space in the credits where my name should have been. I returned to my chair and clicked open my email. A new message sat in the travel folder with the dry subject line, "Joliet meeting accommodations." I opened it expecting a confirmation at the downtown hotel where the rest of the leadership team would stay. The list was neat and symmetrical. Adrian Cole, Ritz-Carlton. Patricia, Ritz-Carlton. Marcus, Ritz-Carlton. Derek, Ritz-Carlton. Then my name at the bottom with an address that did not belong. Comfort Inn, Highway 30. For a second I thought it was a clerical error. I checked the dates. I checked the city. Everything was correct except the dignity. I stared at the line again and felt something tight pull across my ribs like a belt. I typed to the admin channel. "Hi, I think there is a mistake with my room." The typing indicator popped up almost immediately. "No mistake," came the reply. "Budget guidelines from Adrian." My throat went dry. I was a department head on paper. I was the person who designed the architecture for a $200 million deal, and my company had placed me next to a highway. I sent a direct message to Adrian. "There may be an issue with my hotel booking." His response came in under a minute. "No issue. Budget considerations. Your personal logistics are personal." I read the sentence twice. Personal logistics are personal. A tidy little phrase, efficient as a knife. I looked up from the screen and the room blurred for a moment. I had written half of our travel policy myself so that the company would look like it respected its people in front of clients. Business-appropriate venues for professional representation. He had signed it. He had ignored it when it came to me. I felt heat rise under my skin. Then it cooled just as quickly, like water poured over coals. I sat very still and let the words settle into their final shape. Not a mistake. A decision. A moment later, the elevator dinged, and the night guard made his rounds. He gave me a friendly nod through the glass. I nodded back and thought about the ridiculousness of it. The company could afford security at 3 a.m, but not a decent room for the person who kept it alive. I turned back to my desk and opened a folder I had not touched in months. It held screenshots of email threads, change logs with my username, timestamped builds that no one ever read because things always just worked. I added the hotel confirmation to it. Not to weaponize it. Not yet. To remember. To leave a breadcrumb trail out of the forest I had built. I checked the USB in my notebook again like someone patting a pocket to make sure the keys were still there. The metal felt small and heavy. I imagined it as a lighthouse lamp. Nothing dramatic. Just a steady light pointed at the truth. My phone buzzed, a new name across the screen. Evelyn Shaw, not a text, an old email resurfaced by my own search. I clicked it open and reread her words from months ago. Your insights were the highlight of the summit. People like us always get remembered, just not always at first. The line made something ache in me and then made it stand up straighter. I typed a reply and deleted it. Then typed another and deleted that too. I was not ready to ask for anything. I was ready to stop apologizing for existing. The snow thickened outside, turning the lake into a sheet of muted silver. I could see the outline of the Ritz-Carlton from my window like a promise meant for someone else. I pictured the lobby tomorrow, soft carpets and quiet staff, and the easy smile Adrian wore when he knew he belonged. I pictured my room off Highway 30, the sound of trucks groaning through the night, the smell of old carpet that never quite leaves. I smiled without humor. Maybe the contrast would finally make something visible. At 1:30, I finished the last pass on the deck. The models were airtight. The ramp-up plan was clear. The risk mitigation tree was precise enough to make a lawyer breathe easier. I added a single note to a single slide. It referenced the simulation batch IDs that tied every performance gain back to the testing sessions I had run myself. If anyone asked for proof, the truth would be waiting, labeled, time-stamped, undeniable. I closed the file and synced it to the team drive. Then I opened a private folder with an unremarkable name and synced a second copy. The difference between the two was not content. It was control. Before shutting down, I scrolled through the company's Slack channels one last time. Sales was bragging about momentum. Marketing was crafting a morning post about transformative change. Engineering had sent me a quiet thank you for catching a deployment bug before it reached production. I pinned that message to my own window. I would need to remember it later when the noise got loud. I turned off 2 monitors and left one glowing. The light washed the room in a dim blue haze. I packed my bag slowly. Notebook, USB, phone charger, a spare remote battery because Adrian always forgot. I thought about the meetings lined up for tomorrow and about the space inside silence. Not the silence of fear, the silence of refusal. On my way out, I stopped by the server room and rested my palm against the metal door. It vibrated faintly like a living thing. I had spent so many nights in that hum that my bones remembered its pitch. It had been a comfort once. Now it sounded like a promise. The lobby was empty except for the security guard half asleep with a crossword. He looked up when I passed and said, "Have a good night, MS Drake." I liked the way he said my name. As if it belonged to someone with a front door instead of a loading dock. Outside, the cold bit the edges of my face and brought everything into sharp focus. Snow dusted the streetlights and turned the city into a quiet movie set waiting for action to be called. My rideshare pulled up with the soft chime of a tired bell. I climbed in and gave the driver the office address again for morning pickup. He glanced at me in the mirror. "Big day tomorrow." I nodded. At home, I dropped my bag by the door and walked straight to the window. The lake was a blank page. I set the USB on the table and stood there until my breathing matched the steady tick of the kitchen clock. I brewed tea because I needed a ritual that did not require anyone's permission. The phone buzzed one more time. "Adrian again. Hope you're getting rest. Be sharp for questions. Keep it under 5 minutes. We do not want to lose the room." I typed a reply. "Understood." Then I did not hit send. I put the phone face down, took a sip of tea, and let the steam warm my lips. At 2:20, I slid the USB into a small ceramic dish beside my plant. It felt almost domestic. Strange, considering what it held. I set an alarm for 5 and lay down without turning off the lamp. The ceiling was a pale rectangle above me, a projection screen for too many memories. I saw the first day I walked into Velian. I saw the first time Adrian told me we did it. I saw the first time I realized he meant he did it. I closed my eyes and listened to the arms of the building settle around me. When sleep finally came, it was not deep, but it was clean. I dreamt about a corridor of glass and a door at the end of it swinging open. I did not rush to reach it. I let it wait for me. The alarm pierced the quiet in a blunt way that morning alarms always do. I sat up and reached for my notebook first, not the phone. I checked that the USB was still in its dish. It was. I smiled, and this time the smile reached my eyes. I felt the shape of a decision settle into place with the weight of something earned. I showered and dressed in the navy suit I had paid for myself after my budget request for a clothing stipend was denied. "Executive perks," Adrian had said with that easy laugh. In the mirror, I tied my hair back neatly and watched a different version of myself stare back. Not colder, just finished with certain illusions. Before leaving, I opened my email again and drafted a single new message. Subject line was simple: implementation documentation references. The body of the email contained 2 lines, a set of links to simulation batch logs, and a time range. I addressed it to myself. Then I added one more recipient and let my finger hover above the trackpad. I pressed send. On the way out the door, the lake air hit me with a clean slap that tasted like January. The street was already awake with delivery trucks and the soft rumble of morning. I tucked my hands into my pockets and walked toward a day that would look ordinary from the outside. Inside it, a wire had already been cut. A fuse had already been lit. And all I did was stop pretending that my value needed someone else's permission to exist. The sun had not yet risen when I stepped out of my apartment. The streets were soaked in that pale blue light that comes before dawn, the kind that makes everything look honest. I carried my bag over my shoulder and breathed in the cold. My breath came out in clouds. Somewhere downtown, the lights of the Ritz-Carlton were still glittering like a promise kept to someone else. The driver pulled up right on time, his car heater humming softly. He asked if I wanted to stop for coffee. I said no. I had already made one at home, black, bitter, strong enough to wake the dead parts of me that still cared about being perfect. By the time we reached the Velian office, the lobby smelled like disinfectant and ambition. The team was already gathering, dragging suitcases and rolling them across the marble floor. Everyone looked expensive. Marcus in his charcoal suit, Patricia in her navy dress and matching heels. They were all buzzing about the Strathmore meeting like it was a royal wedding. Adrian stood near the glass doors, phone pressed to his ear, smiling that smile he had practiced in mirrors. When he saw me, he raised a hand, not to wave but to command silence while he finished his call. "Chelsea," he said finally, slipping his phone into his pocket. "Good, you made it. The car service is here. You're taking a separate one, right?" I blinked. "Separate?" "Yes, logistics. You're staying near the site, aren't you?" He said it casually, like it had been my idea. I nodded slowly. "The Comfort Inn?" He smiled like that made perfect sense. "Perfect. Saves the company a bit. Appreciate the flexibility as always." Appreciate the flexibility. I wondered if that was how he slept at night, by turning humiliation into efficiency. The others were laughing, sipping espresso from paper cups. I caught fragments of conversation, Patricia joking about her spa reservation, Marcus complaining about room service menus. Their world and mine barely touched. We loaded into separate cars. As I watched their black sedan glide toward downtown, I felt the first flicker of something strange inside me. Not anger. Not yet. More like the recognition that something had broken and would never quite fit again. The drive out to the motel took less than 40 minutes. I stared out the window at gray skies, billboards, and warehouses. When we pulled into the parking lot, the sign was missing 2 letters. It read Co-Ford Inn. Somehow, that felt appropriate. The clerk handed me a keycard without looking up. The air smelled of cleaning spray and disappointment. My room was small, with a view of the highway. Trucks roared by like waves hitting concrete. I dropped my bag on the bed and sat for a long time, listening to the hum of the heater. I could have cried, maybe. But there's a moment when you run out of sadness and what replaces it is clarity. I opened my laptop, connected to the shaky Wi-Fi, and checked my email. A new message from Evelyn Shaw sat at the top of the inbox. It was short, written weeks ago, but forwarded again that morning. "Hope the Strathmore meeting goes well. Don't underestimate how visible you already are." Visible, the word stung. I replied before I could stop myself. "Thank you, I'll be there doing what I always do." Then I deleted it. Visibility was dangerous when you were still inside the machine. I closed the lid of my laptop and leaned back. The ceiling was yellowed with time. The TV on the wall showed static before switching to a weather report about incoming snow. I thought about the first time I met Adrian. I had just finished a systems overhaul that saved his last company from collapse. He had walked into the conference room late, sunglasses still on, and said, "You're the one who fixes impossible things." I had laughed. That was before I learned that in his world, impossible meant something I don't want to understand. Back then, I believed in teamwork, in loyalty, in the illusion that hard work eventually earned respect. Tonight, sitting on that stiff motel bed, I finally understood that I had mistaken usefulness for value. I opened my notebook and drew a single line down the page. On one side, I wrote what I owe them. On the other, what they owe me. Under the first column, I wrote, "Professionalism, clarity, completion." Under the second, nothing. The heater clicked off. The silence was heavy. I reached into my bag, found the USB, and turned it in my fingers. The tiny drive caught the weak light from the lamp and glittered like a secret. It wasn't revenge. Not yet. It was proof. Proof that I existed. Proof that if the empire fell, someone could trace its bones back to me. I set the USB on the nightstand and stared at it until my reflection blurred in the metal. Tomorrow, I would walk into that meeting as the same woman they thought they could overlook. But I knew something they didn't. When you spend years being invisible, you learn to see everything. I woke before the alarm. Truck brakes sighed outside my window, and a thin line of winter light crept across the carpet. For a few seconds, I watched dust hover in that light like a slow snowfall. I could feel the old habit start to tighten in my chest. The one that said hurry, fix, protect. I let it pass. I sat up, reached for the small USB on the nightstand, and slipped it into the inside pocket of my jacket. It felt like a spine made of metal. I liked the weight of it. The motel breakfast was a machine that coughed lukewarm coffee and a basket of wrapped muffins. I took nothing. On the way out, the clerk wished me a good day without looking up. Outside, the air was sharp enough to hurt, and the sky was a flat sheet of gray. I stood for a moment and watched a long line of freight trucks head toward the interstate. It was almost funny. Somewhere today, I would promise a future where those trucks moved smarter. Meanwhile, I had slept 10 yards from their noise. I drove to a small parking garage 3 blocks from Strathmore headquarters. I had printed 2 sets of the most important materials before leaving the office. They sat in my bag now, labeled in a hand I could read even if the room filled with smoke. Simulation summaries, risk trees, deployment timelines. There was also a slim envelope that held a copy of my motel confirmation. I had not planned to bring it. I had brought it anyway. Strathmore's building rose from the sidewalk like a statement. Glass without apology. Chrome without guilt. A security guard checked my name and gave me a visitor badge with a slow nod. The lobby smelled like stone and new money. People moved with the kind of quiet purpose that did not need to shout to be obeyed. I took a seat on a low bench near a wall of white flowers and let the cold from outside evaporate off my coat. The Velian team swept in 10 minutes later, a sleek flock in coordinated shades of confidence, Adrian at the front with his smile already on. He saw me and waved in a way that was almost warm from a distance. Up close, I knew it meant stand by. He had a talent for mistaking command for kindness. Patricia gave me a quick glance that did not quite meet my eyes. Marcus nodded the way people nod at someone who fixes their mistakes. Derek lifted his phone for a quick video clip of all of us in the lobby and said the word historic. I stepped to the side and let his frame miss me. A receptionist led us to the elevator bank. The car was mirrored and bright. In the reflection, our group looked like a company that could not fail. I saw my own face at the edge of that reflection. Calm, awake, a little amused. The boardroom sat on the 20th floor behind a wall of glass that opened over the city. The table was a long river of wood with carafes of water placed at attention and pens lined like soldiers. A tray of pastries steamed quietly in the corner. Everything here existed to keep decisions smooth. The Strathmore team entered in a small wave. A few executives I recognized from our due diligence calls. Harrison, the CEO, tall, deliberate, eyes that searched for the path under your feet. 3 vice presidents who wore the same expression of measured caution. And then Evelyn stepped in with a legal pad under one arm and a silver pen between her fingers. Her gaze moved around the room like a survey drone taking stock of terrain. It landed on me for a fraction of a second. Something there like recognition, not surprise. Not curiosity either, more like confirmation. I felt a line that had been tugging at me for weeks finally go still. We shook hands around the table. Adrian saved Evelyn for last as if they were 2 equals about to perform a ritual. She let him have the moment, then turned to me and said, "Chelsea, thank you for coming." Her voice was calm and ordinary. It still felt like a hand on my shoulder. I took my seat near the end of the table with the backup materials in reach. Adrian stood at the front with a small remote and the deck I had finished in the middle of the night. He looked at me like a pilot about to take off in a plane I had built. I looked back at him and gave a small nod that meant go ahead and try. He started with the origin story. Founders, vision, what problems we existed to solve. He had trimmed his usual flourish. The tone was restrained enough to sound serious and television-ready. The slides flowed, graphs and metrics and clean animations pulled straight from my work. He used the phrase we built without choking on it, which I suppose was progress. I watched the Strathmore executives while he spoke. Harrison's notes were sparse but precise. One of the vice presidents wrote down time frames and circled them twice. The CFO counted beats before numbers landed. Evelyn did not look at the screen as much as she looked at the people in the room, collecting micro-reactions like a scientist logging weather. I had promised myself I would not fill the air when Adrian stumbled, and he had begun to stumble. Not spectacularly, just small slips. A vague phrase where a precise metric should be. A claim that needed a qualifier, the kind of looseness that a friendly room forgives. This was not a friendly room. He moved into the section on architecture. The slide appeared, simple lines over a blueprint background. I felt the old habit rise again to jump in and rescue the shape of the truth. I took a sip of water instead. Let the moment be what it was. Evelyn set her pen down and lifted her gaze to Adrian. Walk us through the logic when the system encounters a root disruption at 4 different nodes at once. He smiled and said the expected words: dynamic reallocation, predictive modeling, redundancy layers. He did not say how the priority tree recalculates, how the penalty weights adjust in relation to forecast variance. The silence after he finished was not hostile. It was simply the kind that follows an answer that does not answer. Harrison nudged the conversation forward with a question about rollout cadence. Adrian was steadier there and regained his rhythm. He talked about phases and milestones and change management, and the vice presidents wrote more notes. I watched the second hand on the wall clock and the way Evelyn's pen tapped a patient tempo against the table. At one point, the remote glitched. Adrian pressed the button and nothing happened. He pressed again. He laughed lightly and made a joke about technology keeping us humble. I reached for my bag without standing and slid a new battery across the table toward him. His hand found it without looking. Habit, reflex. The exchange felt small and private. It was not private at all. When he reached the implementation slide that I had lived inside for months, a door opened at the back of the room and 2 assistants came in with additional coffee. The scent of it threaded the air like a new current. Adrian spoke over the clink of cups and the soft sound of people settling again. He read the major pillars from the screen. I could feel the questions concentrating like weather. Evelyn leaned forward slightly. Who will answer the client when something ruptures in the middle of the night? The person who knows how to stop the bleeding in 30 minutes, not in the morning, not after a status call. Adrian smiled. Our operations director will handle the details. There it was, details. The word he used for systems that carried the weight of everything he promised. I looked at the glass wall opposite me and saw the winter sky throwing a pale light over the city. I let the silence stretch 1 second longer than comfort. Then I said, evenly and without ceremony, I can walk through the failure scenarios if that helps. Heads turned, not all of them, enough of them. Adrian lifted his chin and said of course in a tone that fit nicely inside a smile. Evelyn made a note I could not read and then looked up again with a face that told me to proceed. I did not stand yet. I asked for the clicker and took it like a relay baton. I kept my voice low enough to invite listening and clear enough to mark the map. I spoke about the rollback protocol, the escalation ladder, the 7 documented edges where failure likes to enter, and the way we had trained the system to greet it without panic. I did not sell. I described. I did not dramatize. I accounted. Harrison asked about the conservative estimate in Q3. I explained the model bias we had chosen as a check against overconfidence. The CFO asked for an example of a live incident. I gave him one with timestamps and outcomes and the cost of the fix. He nodded once, grateful for the absence of fluff. Adrian stood next to me with a hand resting on the table. The pose said partnership. The energy said high wire. I could feel the heat of his impatience like a small lamp just off my shoulder. I kept to the time. I did not take the room. I gave the room the information it needed to feel like a decision would not be a dare. When I finished the section, I handed the remote back to him. My fingers did not brush his. He thanked me in a tone that could pass for collegial. Evelyn's pen paused above the paper, then completed a word. We broke for 10 minutes. People stretched, poured another cup, checked their phones. I stepped to the window and let my eyes rest on the grid of streets below. The snow had stopped. The city looked rinsed and ready. Adrian came to stand beside me. He kept his eyes on the glass and his voice low. Nice save. Keep it tight. Do not lose them in the weeds. I took a breath and heard how quiet the room had become. Someone had opened the door to the hallway. Distant footsteps, a printer, the world doing its ordinary work. I looked at our reflection in the window. He stood a little taller than me, his jaw as set as ever. Behind us, the table glowed with polite power. I said, without turning, I am not losing anyone. He smiled the way people smile at a dog that has brought back the ball. Good, let us close this. We returned to the table. The assistants cleared the empty cups with a soft choreography that felt like a signal. The second half of the meeting began with a slide about culture and partnership. The words were clean and aspirational. The kind of slide no one ever believes and everyone expects to see. Adrian spoke about values. He spoke about alignment. Spoke about respect. Evelyn let him finish. She set her pen down. Then, in the same tone a person uses when asking for the salt, she said, "Mr. Cole, does your leadership team stay at the Ritz-Carlton together when you travel for key client meetings?" The room did not move. The question sat there like a glass marble. Perfect. Harmless. Capable of breaking everything that had never been sturdy to begin with. I watched the smallest change ripple across Adrian's face. Not anger, not even fear. Recognition. He opened his mouth. The world held its breath. The silence stretched until it became something fragile. Adrian's smile flickered, just a microsecond too long. Then he said, light and confident, "Of course, our team stays together, unity matters." He didn't know that Evelyn had already seen the travel records. She had the receipts, the invoices, and that tidy little motel booking tucked into her folder. I knew because I had sent them anonymously days ago. Her expression didn't change. She just tilted her head slightly, a scientist observing a new variable. "That's good to hear," she said, "because consistency in treatment often reflects consistency in ethics." The words landed softly, but I could feel them ripple across the table like shockwaves under the surface. Harrison cleared his throat. The vice presidents pretended to check their notes. Adrian shifted the remote between his fingers like a nervous tick. I kept my gaze on the city below, on the snow melting into the rooftops. Every building reflected sunlight like it had something to confess. Evelyn continued, still calm. "I ask because partnerships are built on the assumption that leadership reflects the culture beneath it. When your directors and department heads are treated as equals, the data tends to show better operational longevity." Adrian nodded, too quickly. "Absolutely. At Velian, we're like family." Family? The word tasted like salt. Evelyn's eyes flicked to me again, almost lazily, as she turned a page in her notes. "And Ms. Drake, you handle operations, correct?" I nodded. "Yes. Would you agree with that statement?" The question was a knife wrapped in silk. I could feel every heartbeat echo in the room. I took a slow breath. "I would say that Velian runs efficiently," I answered. "And efficiency has a cost." That was all, no accusation, no drama, just the truth, compact enough to pass for a business insight. Evelyn smiled, tiny, approving. "Honesty, I like that." Adrian's eyes cut toward me like a warning. "Chelsea tends to be modest," he said quickly. "She's an asset, of course, but she doesn't always see the big picture." I almost laughed. The big picture, that's what he called his reflection. The meeting rolled on, slides changed, numbers flickered, but the energy in the room had shifted. Every sentence Adrian spoke now carried a faint tremor. He stumbled over acronyms he had once recited with ease. The investors were no longer dazzled, they were analyzing, measuring, and Evelyn was watching him the way a hawk watches the shadow before it moves. When the presentation finally ended, the applause was polite, brief, and hollow. The executives began to stand, shaking hands, murmuring phrases like "we'll review internally" and "next steps." Evelyn stayed seated. "Mr. Cole," she said, "before you go, one last thing." He paused, smoothing his tie. "Of course." Her tone was even. "In your internal documentation, who holds authorship of the predictive optimization module?" For a heartbeat, no one breathed. Adrian blinked. "That would be collective." "Collective?" Evelyn repeated. "Our analysts cross-referenced code logs. It appears all major commits come from a single account. See Drake." He laughed, too loud, too fast. "Oh, that. Chelsea manages the administrative access. She compiles the team's work." I watched Evelyn write something in her notebook. "Compiles," she said softly, like she was tasting the word. "Interesting." Then she stood, extending her hand. "Thank you for your time." And just like that, it was over. The Strathmore team left the room first, voices low, papers gathered neatly. The door closed with a soft click that sounded like judgment. Adrian exhaled hard, finally letting the mask drop. "What the hell was that?" he hissed. "You just stood there, you could have backed me up." I didn't move. "I did," I said quietly. "Not contradicting you." He stared at me, confusion twisting into anger. "Don't get smart, Chelsea." I met his eyes. Too late. He opened his mouth to reply, but the door swung open again. Evelyn stood there, holding her tablet. "Mr. Cole," she said, "a word." He straightened, instantly polished again. "Of course." Her gaze brushed over me one more time before they walked out together. I gathered my papers slowly, methodically. My fingers were steady now. There was no triumph, no fear. Only inevitability. I walked to the window. Snow had started again, thin flakes drifting like static over the skyline. The city looked endless, and for once so did the possibilities. 10 minutes later, Evelyn returned. Alone, she crossed the room to where I stood, her heels quiet against the marble. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then she asked, "How long have you known?" I didn't pretend to misunderstand. "About what?" That you were the only one building the system they're selling. I looked at her, really looked, long enough to stop hoping someone would notice. She smiled faintly. They noticed today. I didn't know whether to thank her or be afraid of what that meant. Evelyn tucked her tablet under her arm. You'll get a call within 48 hours, she said. From the board, they'll want to talk about structural realignment. Make sure you answer. Then she turned to leave. Evelyn, I said before I could stop myself. She paused. Why ask about the hotel? Her mouth curved just slightly. Because people always reveal their values in the smallest decisions. And then she was gone. I stood there for a long time after she left. The boardroom was empty now, sunlight spilling across the polished table, washing away the last trace of power that had ever felt one-sided. My phone buzzed. A text from Adrian, "Don't do anything stupid." I smiled. For the first time, the message didn't sound like an order. It sounded like fear. I slipped my phone into my coat pocket, walked out of the glass tower, and stepped into the wind. The city was awake, bright, indifferent. I joined the crowd, anonymous but alive. For years, I had built systems designed to correct inefficiency. It was time to build one for myself. The elevator doors closed on the cold air outside and replaced it with the soft hum of the building. I watched my reflection in the metal and practiced a neutral expression. Not victory, not nerves, something steady. Something that could pass for ordinary on a day when nothing was. By the time I reached Velian, the office buzz had returned to its default setting. You could feel the difference when a company believed its own press. Conversations got brighter, footsteps quicker, jokes a little sharper around the edges. People who usually looked at their screens looked up to greet each other as if a camera had started rolling. I crossed the lobby with my coat over my arm. Someone from marketing was already workshopping an internal headline. Partnership of the Year. Transforming supply chains for the modern world. There was always a phrase ready, a hook designed to make the future feel inevitable. Adrian arrived a few steps behind me, took his place in the center of the room without asking for it, and clapped once to call attention. He thanked the team for their hard work, praised our alignment, talked about momentum, and promised a celebration once the contracts were signed. The speech was polished without being memorable. He had a gift for language that settled like a mist and left no trace on your clothes. I felt my phone vibrate in my pocket midway through. I did not look until his speech ended. When I checked the screen, my pulse did an odd little skip. Strathmore. Subject line, follow up. I opened it. The message was short. Thank you for the thoughtful presentation today. We would like to schedule a technical and implementation deep dive tomorrow morning at 9. Chelsea, please confirm your availability. No need to bring additional attendees. I read the lines again, each one a quiet turning of the wheel. No need to bring additional attendees. I could see the ripples move through the day in front of me. If I said yes, some things would never be the same. If I said no, I would be telling myself a story I no longer believed. I walked toward my office, the one near the servers that hummed like a sleeping animal, and closed the door behind me. I placed my coat on the chair back, set my bag under the desk, and read the email one more time. Then I typed a reply. Confirmed, I will be there. My finger hovered for a breath, then clicked send. The sound was small and final. A minute later, there was a knock. Patricia stepped in without waiting for an answer, a habit she shared with most people who are used to a certain kind of executive gravity. You were strong in there, she said. The line sat on the table between us, safe and noncommittal. I thanked her. She glanced at the monitor on my desk. Are we expecting a follow-up from them? I thought about lying. The old reflex stirred, then fell away. They want a deep dive tomorrow morning, I said. Technical and implementation details. Her eyes flickered. That is good, we can get Adrian prepped. They asked for me alone, I said. The way the sentence changed the air surprised us both. She tried to lift a smile and let it fall before it formed. I see. She did not say anything else at first. Then she said, quietly, be careful, Chelsea. You know how he is about control. I held her gaze. I know how I am about truth. She gave a small, tired nod and left before the silence became another person in the room. I stood at the window and watched the afternoon fold itself over the streets. There are moments when a choice feels like a path carved ahead of you. This did not feel like that. It felt like stepping off a familiar platform and trusting the ground would form under my feet. I made a list on a yellow pad. Items only I could answer. Items someone might try to claim. I mapped failure scenarios, cross-referenced risk mitigations, and pulled timestamps that told the story with no adjectives. I built a small packet of evidence that did not read like a case. It read like work. At 3, Marcus messaged me, can you take a look at the revised growth bands? He always asked like a person seeking permission to bother someone more important than he felt. I opened the sheet and found the usual. Optimism had widened a column without widening the logic. I fixed it. I returned it. He sent a string of thank you emojis instead of words. It was easier that way. At 4, Adrian forwarded a message from a journalist asking for a quote about the transformative partnership. He wanted to respond tonight. I told him to wait until we cleared final diligence. He did not reply, which meant he would do what he wanted and imagine he had listened. At 5, a courier arrived with a thin envelope. The receptionist knocked and handed it to me with a cautious smile. The return address carried the Strathmore seal. Inside was a simple letter on heavy paper. Tomorrow, 9 sharp. Chelsea Drake, implementation lead. Please present. I ran my thumb over the embossed header until the letters warmed under my skin. I left the office after sunset. The lobby smelled like rain and stilettos and that sweet chemical cleaner that tries to mimic lemons. Outside, the street was wet and bright, the city performing its favorite trick of looking both endless and personal at the same time. On the ride home, I thought about the first time I realized I was holding more than a job. It was a night like this one, months ago, when a server died at 3 in the morning and a warehouse in Kentucky stopped breathing. I had woken to an alert, logged on in the dark, and walked the system back from the edge like a diver, guiding a panicked swimmer to the surface. The next day, Adrian told the board that our resilience was unmatched. I watched his hands move as he spoke and felt an odd detachment, like I was seeing a recording of my own life narrated by someone else. At home, I cooked something simple and barely tasted it. I set the USB on the table again and aligned it with the edge like it was a compass. My phone pulsed 3 times on the counter. A group chat about celebratory drinks. A ping from Derek asking if he could tag me in a behind-the-scenes post. A direct message from Adrian. Good work today. Tight answers. Try to keep it at headline level tomorrow. We do not want to bore them. I sat down and typed without rehearsing. They asked for depth. That is what I will bring. He typed back almost at once. Remember who owns the narrative. I looked at the words until they separated into harmless shapes. Then I placed the phone face down and went back to the packet on my table. I revised a sentence, removed a flourish, added a date. By 10, I felt empty enough to sleep. I set a timer for the morning and pulled the curtains but left a small gap of city light to remind me where I was. Sleep came quickly, no dreams, only a clean stretch of dark. My alarm cut into the quiet like a blade through cloth. I showered, dressed in the same navy suit, and tied my hair back. As I was lacing my shoes, another email arrived. Evelyn, 3 lines. Glad you confirmed. Bring what matters. Leave what does not. I stared at the words as if they might rearrange themselves into a larger message. They did not need to. The instruction was exact. I placed the packet into a slim leather folder and slid the USB into my inner pocket. I looked at the mirror by the door and saw a woman I recognized. Not armored, not soft, balanced. On the street, the morning tasted like cold metal and burnt coffee. The city exhaled steam from its vents and taxis blinked like small, impatient animals. I felt calm where I should have been nervous. The calm did not feel like bravado. It felt like alignment. I reached Strathmore with 5 minutes to spare and stood in the lobby for a breath. The receptionist looked up with an expression I could not quite read. It was not kindness and not indifference either. Something that said the day already knew my name. We rode the elevator in silence. The doors opened on a different room this time, not the ceremonial boardroom. A smaller space with a round table and 3 chairs. Harrison sat already with a tablet and a cup of coffee he did not seem to need. The CFO was there with a neat stack of questions. Evelyn sat with her pen poised and her eyes as patient as ever. Chelsea, Harrison said, thank you for coming. We appreciate clarity. He gestured to the chair opposite him. I sat. I placed the folder on the table and met their eyes one by one. They looked back the way people look when they are prepared to change their minds if the facts demand it. We will begin with the architecture, Evelyn said. Then we will talk about leadership. Her tone made leadership sound like a variable to solve, not a crown to wear. I opened the folder and slid the first document forward. The room breathed in. The day tilted. And I began. The first 30 minutes of the meeting were all numbers. Clean, verifiable, immune to politics. That was the safe part. After that, the air in the small room began to change shape. Harrison closed the tablet and leaned back slightly. His voice carried the careful weight of someone who understood that questions were scalpels. We've seen impressive architecture, Ms. Drake. I'd like to understand the leadership side. Who makes the key decisions when things turn unpredictable? I didn't look away. I do. Until now, those decisions were filtered through Mr. Cole for approval. The CFO interjected, filtered, meaning delayed. Meaning delayed, I said. The words left my mouth steady, stripped of any drama. I watched the pen in his hand freeze mid-note. Evelyn's gaze softened. And if we removed that filter, the room fell quiet. It wasn't a hypothetical. It was a test balloon, and everyone felt the shift in air pressure. I said, then you'd see what Velian is capable of at full capacity. Harrison gave a small nod. The kind of nod that said he'd already decided something but wasn't ready to say it out loud. We spent another hour going through contingency maps, data integrity audits, and ethics compliance. The technical talk gave me something solid to stand on, but beneath it all, I could sense Evelyn steering the conversation towards something larger. Every question she asked wasn't just about systems, it was about who built them, who owned them, and who could lead them. When it ended, she stood, extended her hand, and said, "Thank you, Chelsea. That was illuminating." "Of course," I said, and gathered my papers. She waited until the others left before she spoke again. "He'll know you're the center of the storm now. Are you ready for that?" I smiled faintly. "He's always known. He just thought the storm worked for him." Evelyn looked at me for a long second, then said, "Good, because the next few days will test what kind of weather you can survive." She left, and I sat there for a moment, letting the hum of the lights settle back into silence. When I stepped into the corridor, my phone vibrated. Adrian's name lit up the screen. I hesitated before answering. "Chelsea," his voice came sharp, controlled. "What exactly did you say in that meeting?" "The truth," I replied. "The truth doesn't always serve the company." "No," I said softly. "It serves reality, that's what they asked for." He exhaled slowly. "You think you can outplay me in front of investors? Be careful." "I'm not playing," I said, and ended the call. For the first time in months, my hands weren't shaking. Back at Velian, the tension was a living thing. Whispers in hallways. Slack messages ending mid-sentence when I entered a channel. Patricia avoided eye contact. Marcus sent me data files with no greeting, no thank you, just attachments and silence. Adrian hadn't been seen since the call. He was probably holed up in his office, drawing battle plans. I could imagine him pacing, crafting new narratives in that polished mind of his. He always had a version of the truth ready, one that kept him shining in the spotlight. That afternoon, an email arrived from HR. Reminder, performance review check-ins due Friday. The timing was almost comic. I opened a blank document and began typing my notes for it anyway. Not because I cared about the formalities, but because words were weapons, and I needed mine sharpened. Key responsibility: ensure operational resilience and optimization across all product streams. Key challenge: maintaining structural integrity despite misaligned leadership representation. Key metric: survival. I saved it under the title Review Draft Reel TXT. As evening fell, I walked past Adrian's office. The door was closed, the blinds half drawn. Through the narrow gap, I saw him on a call, gesturing sharply. I could hear the edge in his voice even through the glass. Words like narrative, containment, internal optics. He hadn't noticed me. I stood there for a heartbeat, then kept walking. In the elevator, my reflection looked calmer than I felt. Beneath the stillness was something electric, something that had been quiet for too long. Outside, snow had begun to fall again. The world looked cleaner when it was covered in white, as if it was constantly rewriting itself. I walked toward the train station, past strangers in coats and scarves, each carrying their own invisible storms. I thought of Evelyn's words, "What kind of weather you can survive?" I smiled to myself, because storms weren't something I endured anymore. They were something I built. When the fracture came, it didn't start with shouting. It started with silence. 2 days after the Strathmore meeting, Velian's office moved like a body holding its breath. Slack channels went quiet. Coffee breaks ended quicker. People began to type shorter sentences in emails, afraid of what could be quoted, archived, or forwarded. I felt it before I saw it, like a hairline crack in glass spreading just beneath the surface. That morning, I arrived early. The servers were still humming their low mechanical lullaby, the only sound that never lied. I checked the dashboards, verified overnight performance logs, and synced the latest system outputs. Numbers were clean. The machine was honest, even when people weren't. By 8:15, Adrian's office lights were on. That was unusual. He never came before 9 unless something was burning. At 8:30, Patricia appeared at my door with a face that tried to be neutral. "He wants you in the boardroom." "Now," she nodded. "It's urgent." I grabbed my notebook and walked down the hall. The air between desks felt thicker than usual, like everyone was trying to inhale without making noise. The boardroom was already half full. Adrian stood at the head of the table, jacket off, sleeves rolled up, posture too relaxed to be real. A few department heads were seated around him, eyes darting between laptops and phones. "Chelsea," he said as I entered, smiling like a man performing calm. "Glad you could join us." He gestured to a seat across from him. I sat, placed my notebook on the table, and waited. He started talking immediately, his tone clipped but still dressed in confidence. "We've had some feedback from Strathmore. Productive, of course. They're impressed by our systems, but they've raised a few questions about internal structure. Leadership, authorship, things like that." My pulse stayed steady. "I'm aware." He tilted his head. "Are you?" He turned his laptop toward the table. On the screen was an email chain between Strathmore executives and our legal team. My name appeared 3 times in the thread, highlighted. "They're asking for follow-up directly from you," he said. "Interesting, right? You must have made quite an impression." I said nothing. He wanted a reaction, something to break the composure I'd been wearing like armor. He continued. "Of course this creates confusion. They think you speak for Velian. You don't. You support Velian." That word again. Support. It landed like a slap disguised as praise. He leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. "So, let's be clear, you'll forward any future correspondence to me. No direct responses without my review. Understood?" I met his gaze. "No." A few heads snapped up from their laptops. Adrian's smile froze for half a beat. "Excuse me?" I said no. "Strathmore requested my input directly on technical and operational details. That's my domain. If I forward everything through you, we'll lose accuracy and time." He chuckled, a short, practiced sound that never reached his eyes. "You seem to think this is a democracy." "No," I said quietly. "I think it's an equation. Inputs, outputs, accuracy matters." He pushed back from the table. "You're walking a fine line, Chelsea." I stood. "Then maybe it's time someone walked it straight." The silence that followed was cold and deep. Patricia shifted uncomfortably. Marcus stared at his coffee. No one else moved. Adrian finally said, "You're emotional, take the day, get some rest." It wasn't an offer. It was a dismissal wrapped in concern. I gathered my notebook and left without a word. In the elevator, I could feel my heart catching up to what had just happened. Every instinct screamed that I had just crossed a threshold I couldn't uncross. When the doors opened to the lobby, Evelyn was there. Not in person, her face appeared on the screen of my phone, a new message waiting. "They'll push first. Let them, don't push back yet. I'll handle the timing." It was like she had been standing in the room with me. I stared at the message for a long moment before typing back. "Handle what timing?" No reply. The rest of the day stretched thin. I went home early, though home didn't feel like a safe word anymore. I poured myself coffee, sat by the window, and opened my laptop. I reread the board's internal emails, the legal notes, the meeting transcripts. Strathmore's message was clear. They wanted transparency. They wanted to know who had built the foundation they were buying. And Adrian couldn't allow that. Not because it wasn't true, but because it was too true. I scrolled to the bottom of the last email. There was a line from Evelyn. "Final due diligence review next Wednesday. Authors of proprietary code expected for presentation." That was 5 days away. 5 days until the truth walked into the room wearing my face. I closed the laptop and turned toward the window. Snow was falling again, steady this time, coating the streets like pages being rewritten. It struck me then that maybe this wasn't about revenge. Revenge was too small, too emotional. This was about correction. About setting the record straight, not for glory, but for balance. Systems crave equilibrium, so do people. The hum of the city outside sounded like the servers back at Velian, restless, electric, alive. I whispered to the glass, "Let them think I'm resting." Because I was recalculating. The next morning, I woke before dawn to the soft sound of notifications. A string of emails, one after another, like a quiet storm forming behind my back. HR. Legal. Internal affairs. The subject lines read like warnings written in corporate language. Clarification of roles. Request for documentation. Performance compliance check. Adrian was moving faster than I thought he would. I made coffee and read every word carefully. The tone was polite, professional, and sharp enough to bleed through the screen. HR wanted confirmation of who had authored certain sections of the optimization system. Legal wanted consistency in messaging with investors. Internal affairs wanted to ensure cohesion in executive communications. It was the administrative version of suffocation. I took another sip of coffee and smiled. He wasn't subtle anymore. I sent short, clean replies. I didn't argue. I didn't justify. I simply attached the relevant logs and time-stamped commits, each one signed with my credentials, each one irrefutable. By the time I arrived at the office, the storm had already reached the corridors. Conversations stopped when I passed. Laughter turned to silence. It wasn't hostility yet, it was anticipation, the kind that fills a room when people sense a shift in gravity. Patricia caught up to me by the elevators. "He's in early again," she whispered, "and he's different." "Different how?" "Colder," she hesitated. "Be careful, Chelsea, I think he's preparing something official." I nodded. "He always does." When I reached my desk, there was a letter waiting. Plain envelope. My name written in that perfect, controlled handwriting that could belong only to him. I opened it and read. "Effective immediately, you are temporarily relieved of leadership duties related to the Strathmore implementation pending review of authorship and communication protocols." No signature, just his initials. If even his name had better things to do. I folded the letter and set it on my desk. The first move had been made. At 9:07, I got a message from Evelyn. "Do not contest anything. Keep your files safe. The board is watching patterns, not words." I read it twice, feeling the odd calm of someone already standing in the eye of a storm. For the rest of the morning, I worked quietly. No calls, no meetings, just the code and the numbers that couldn't lie. Every keystroke felt deliberate, like laying bricks in a wall I knew I would need soon. At noon, Marcus came by. He closed the door behind him and sat without being invited. "He's spinning it," he said under his breath. "He's saying Strathmore's questioning your data integrity, that your algorithms were incomplete." I met his eyes. "And you believe that?" He shook his head quickly. "No, but others might. You know how people are, they align with whoever holds the light." "He's burning the house down," I said quietly. "He just hasn't realized yet that I built the foundation." Marcus looked like he wanted to say more but didn't. He stood and left as quietly as he came. By 3, HR had called me in for a discussion. The kind of meeting that sounds harmless until you sit down. The HR director, a woman named Lillian I'd barely spoken to, was waiting with a legal observer. Both wore the same tight, neutral smiles. "Chelsea," she began, "we've received some inquiries regarding your communication with Strathmore. We simply want to clarify your role in that process." "I've been transparent," I said. "They reached out directly about technical details." I provided information as requested. Lillian nodded, her pen hovering above the paper. "Of course, and Mr. Cole was informed." I held her gaze. "He was aware." That was true. He had been aware, just not informed. The difference mattered. She scribbled something down. "Good, and you're comfortable with your current responsibilities?" "Comfortable isn't the word I'd use," I said, keeping my tone even. "But I'm committed." Lillian smiled like she was hearing an answer she'd been instructed to record. "Perfect. We'll follow up in writing." As I left, the legal observer closed his laptop and gave me a look that said, "This isn't about HR." Back at my desk, I checked the shared drives. Half my folders were already inaccessible. My permissions had been quietly downgraded. I could see file names, but not the contents. It was a slow erasure, first your access, then your relevance, then your name, but he'd forgotten something. The USB was still in my coat pocket. I pulled it out, held it between my fingers, and watched the way the light caught on its surface. Inside that tiny piece of metal was every project note, every log, every revision and rollback, all time-stamped, all signed, all mine. It wasn't just proof. It was the whole anatomy of the truth. At 6 p.m., the office emptied. I waited until the lights dimmed, then walked to Adrian's office. The glass door reflected my face back at me, steady and unreadable. I knocked once, then entered. He was at his desk, typing furiously. The air smelled like coffee and arrogance. "Chelsea," he said without looking up, "if this is about the transition letter, it's standard procedure." "Of course," I said, stepping closer. "Just wanted to thank you." He glanced up, puzzled. "For what?" "For reminding me who I am." His eyebrows rose. "You should be careful how you talk to me." I smiled. "I am." Then I placed the letter he'd sent on his desk, folded neatly, and beside it the USB drive. "Just so you know," I said softly, "I've been documenting everything. Systems, communications, performance metrics, clarity." His expression flickered just for a moment, the calm cracked. "That sounds like a threat." "No," I said, turning to leave. "Just transparency. Isn't that what we all want?" I walked out before he could answer. Outside, the night was colder than it had been in weeks. The city lights flickered on one by one, and the snow reflected them back like 1,000 tiny truths refusing to disappear. I took a deep breath and felt the weight of the day lift, not gone, but shifted, balanced. The fracture had widened, and for the first time, I wasn't standing on the edge of it. I was the one drawing the line. By morning, the rumors had learned to walk. They moved through the hallways with coffee cups and careful smiles. I heard my name in fragments that ended as I turned the corner. Someone used the word unstable in a whisper and then pretended to cough. Another said misaligned and tried to make it sound like pity. I did not stop to correct anyone. My time was better spent on the parts of the story that could still be shaped. An email from communications arrived at 8:19. They were drafting a press note about the strength of our leadership and the clarity of our intellectual property. They wanted my sign-off on a paragraph that credited the predictive module to a cross-functional team under the vision of the CEO. The sentence had no names in it. That was the point. I declined to approve it and included 3 lines of objective language about authorship logs and oversight. The reply came back within minutes. "Thank you for your feedback. We will proceed with the approved phrasing." Adrian posted on his feed at 9. A photo of the skyline. A caption about transformational season and execution excellence. He tagged me and the heads of sales and marketing and left out engineering. I did not like or comment. Within an hour, a small storm of praise gathered under it. People who wanted to be seen said the kinds of things that looked good on screens. The algorithm rewarded them with more visibility. That was how illusions survived, not with malice, with applause. At 10 on the dot, I received a calendar invite that was not a request. All hands meeting, main conference room, 10:30. I closed my laptop and walked there slowly. The chairs filled with faces that could not decide where to look. Some chose their phones, some chose me and then chose the floor. Patricia sat near the front with a notebook that she did not open. Marcus stood in the back and watched the door like it might tell him what to do. Adrian strode in with a fresh suit and a smile that belonged to a different day. He thanked everyone for their dedication. He talked about velocity and alignment and the power of unified messaging. Then he did the thing he loves most. He told us who we were. We are a team. We are a family. We are one voice. I felt my jaw loosen in the same controlled way I used to study a system at the edge of failure. I breathed and waited. He pivoted to the camera someone in marketing had set up. A small red light watched him like an obedient eye. He said our partners had asked for clarity. He said we would give it. He said rumors did not build companies. He did not say my name. He did not need to. When a spotlight moves, everyone can see what it is avoiding. He opened the floor for questions. No one wants to be the first person into cold water. The room was quiet. I raised my hand because I was tired of watching the surface. He nodded with a gracious gesture that told the camera he welcomed transparency. I asked one question. Will the authors of the predictive optimization system be credited by name in all investor and board materials going forward? He smiled, "Cert, we always recognize contributions. By name." I said it softly so the word could echo in the room where it mattered. His eyes tightened by a fraction. "We will recognize the team." "Thank you," I said, and sat. The meeting ended soon after, not with applause but with a scatter of chairs and the sound of messages being typed before people reached the hall. In my office, the silence felt cleaner. I opened the logs again and checked the audit trail. It was all there: commits, notes, decision trees, the 1,000 small choices that add up to a system that can carry weight. I printed 10 pages that spoke clearly in a language only a few people ever learn. I placed them in a slim folder and labeled it with the date and time. I set it beside the USB and felt the symmetry land like a square on a chessboard. The first call came from a journalist. "Off the record," she said, which means on a delay if it becomes useful. She wanted a quote about the authorship controversy at Velian. I told her there was no controversy. There were logs. She laughed and said that did not make a headline. I told her I was not in the business of headlines. She thanked me for the time and said she would circle back. She would. They always do when truth collides with drama because drama sells until truth changes the price. At noon, I received a number I did not recognize. Evelyn. Her voice was quiet and bright. She said we are very close. She said the board would meet the day after tomorrow at 10. She said the room would not look like it did last time. I asked what that meant. She said they would ask small questions that break open large answers. She told me to bring the clean packet and nothing more. She told me to wear whatever I felt strongest in. I almost laughed. The advice sounded like something a friend would give before a difficult day. She was not my friend. She was a woman who knew how to set fire to a problem without lifting her voice. After we hung up, I walked to engineering. They lived in a room where noise felt purposeful. Screens glowed with real work. The energy there had always been different. Less vanity. More oxygen. A young engineer I had hired last year looked up when I entered and lifted a hand in a small salute. He asked if I needed anything. I said no. Then I said thank you, He looked surprised. He should not have been. I owed him that for the late night he covered and for the bug he caught that saved us a month of pain. He smiled in a shy way and turned back to his screen. Not loyalty, just respect. That was the currency I wanted to spend. On the way back to my desk, I passed the glass wall of Adrian's office. He stood inside with 2 board members on a video call, his hand cutting the air in precise shapes. He saw me and held my gaze as he spoke. The performance did not break. It never does in front of people he wants to impress. I thought of the hotel carpet under my feet at the motel and the way the room smelled like old decisions. I thought about the way he said personal logistics are personal. I thought about the sentence as a math problem and felt something in me resolve into an answer. By late afternoon, the smear campaign matured. A blog with good connections posted a piece about a dispute over authorship at a mid-stage logistics company. They did not name Velian. They did not need to. Anyone who mattered could read the outline. The comment section warmed quickly with people who had stories about credit and light and who gets to stand where the camera points. I did not read all of it. I had work to do. But I saw one line that stayed with me. Somewhere a woman is holding her breath waiting to see if she still exists tomorrow. I did not feel seen. I felt confirmed. At 5, Patricia appeared in my doorway. She closed the door and stood with her arms folded as if she were keeping the room from slipping away. He is pushing for an internal censure, she said. Claims of insubordination. He wants to say you damaged investor relations by going around him. I let the sentence sit. Then I said softly, investors asked me for the truth and I gave it. If that damages anything, then the thing was already broken. She nodded once. For a second I saw the person she had been before she learned to file down her edges to fit into the shape of the room. She said, I cannot stand in front of this yet, but I will not stand against you. It was enough. Not heroism, not betrayal, something closer to human. When she left, the room felt different, not warmer, not colder. More accurate. Evening settled over the city like a slow inhale. I stayed late to finish a cycle of tests that no one had asked for but everyone would need. I documented the results with the care of someone writing a message to the future. Then I packed the slim folder, slid the USB into my jacket, and turned off my monitor. The blue glow faded and left me in a soft dark that felt like a pause before music. Outside, the wind off the lake caught my coat and lifted it like a flag. I walked without hurry and watched my reflection move through the black glass of storefronts. In the distance, a siren rose and fell and rose again. The city was always telling its own story. Tonight I felt aligned with its rhythm. Not the noise, the pulse. At home, I placed the folder on the table and set the USB beside it. I brewed tea and stood by the window. The apartments across the street glowed in small rectangles. Someone watered a plant. Someone argued softly and then laughed. Someone sat in a chair and tilted their head back with their eyes closed. The world was full of people doing ordinary things that kept them alive. My phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. The board has questions about travel arrangements this week. Are you available to provide documentation? No signature, no need. I typed yes and included a screenshot of the confirmation from the motel. I attached the travel policy I had written. I wrote one sentence beneath it. This policy was signed by the CEO. There was no reply. There did not need to be. I went to bed early and slept deep. I dreamt of a room with white walls and a window open to winter. I stood in the doorway until I realized I did not need to ask to enter. When I stepped in, the floor did not creak. The air did not resist. It was my room. Morning arrived like a clean page. I dressed, took the folder, and left the apartment before dawn. The streets were salt white and quiet. A woman scraped ice from her windshield with small, determined strokes. A man carried a sleeping child across the sidewalk and tucked the blanket tighter around her shoulders. These were the things that never made headlines but kept the world from stopping. I breathed in the cold and let it crystallize my focus. In the lobby at Velian, a courier waited with another envelope. Inside was a formal notice of the final diligence session at Strathmore. It listed attendees by role: CEO, CFO, legal, implementation lead. Under that last line, there was my name. I felt something lift in my chest and settle again. Not relief, not yet, recognition. By mid-morning, the office had the brittle brightness of a place bracing for impact. People were friendly in the way people are when they want to be able to say they were always kind to whoever wins. The sales team practiced neutrality. The engineers practiced patience. Marketing practiced posture. Adrian called a quick sync at noon. He laid out talking points. He reminded us about optics. He said we should all remember who steers the ship. He looked at me like a captain daring the ocean. I did not blink. I did not smile. I took notes I would never need. When the meeting ended, I stayed behind and looked out the window at the cold glitter of the day. The city did not know what was about to happen in a glass room 20 floors up. The city did not care. That thought comforted me. It made everything true size again. On my way out, I passed the wall where the company kept its awards. I paused at the magazine cover that had crowned Adrian as the visionary of our era. The glass was spotless. The frame was straight. I could see myself reflected in the gloss, not behind him anymore, beside him, for one beat longer. Then I kept walking. Tomorrow the board would ask small questions that cracked open the shape of reality. Tomorrow someone would be forced to say a simple sentence about a hotel. Tomorrow the story would stop being about personality and start being about proof. I went home and put the folder back on the table. I checked the locks. I charged my phone. I watered the plant that had survived 3 winters on nothing but routine and stubbornness. I looked at the lake. The surface was dark and quiet and sure of itself. I whispered to the empty room, almost amused, almost grateful. Let him think this is a game. I am bringing rules. The morning of the board session arrived with that peculiar stillness that comes before irreversible things. The sky was an unbroken gray, the kind of light that makes every reflection sharper. I dressed slowly, button by button, until I looked like the version of myself I had been building toward for months, quiet, composed, impossible to dismiss. The ride downtown felt shorter than usual. The city was waking up around me, indifferent and magnificent. When the elevator doors opened to Strathmore's upper floor, I saw Evelyn waiting near the reception area. Her hair was tied back, her expression unreadable. "Chelsea," she said, "you're early. Always." "Good," she nodded once. "It's going to move fast." We walked together toward the conference room. The same glass walls, the same view of the frozen city, but the atmosphere was heavier this time, more electric. Adrian was already there, standing at the head of the table as if the view itself had been assigned to him. He looked flawless, charcoal suit, silver cufflinks, practiced calm, but his eyes gave away the fatigue of someone who hadn't slept well. Evelyn took her seat beside Harrison. The rest of the board members arranged themselves like chess pieces, each carrying a different kind of silence. I sat opposite Adrian, the folder in front of me, the USB resting inside my jacket pocket. Harrison began. "We appreciate everyone's time this morning. The purpose of this session is to finalize authorship verification for Velian's predictive system, as requested by our auditors." Adrian smiled. "Of course, I've already prepared a summary of our team's collaborative process. Velian prides itself on shared ownership. No single contributor defines the product." Evelyn folded her hands. "Before we proceed, we'd like to hear from the implementation lead directly. Ms. Drake, can you walk us through the origin structure of the optimization module?" Adrian's smile didn't move, but his eyes did. They flicked toward me like a warning. I opened the folder. "The module originated 18 months ago during the Velian logistics pivot," I said. "Initial prototypes were designed by me, verified by the analytics team, and integrated through the architecture layer I developed. Documentation of each stage is available in the code log archive." I slid the printed logs across the table, time-stamped, clean, impossible to dispute. Evelyn scanned them, then looked at Adrian. "Do these align with your records?" For the first time, he hesitated. "There, early versions, we've since..." "Since when?" she asked. He faltered. "Since we refined the framework." Evelyn leaned back slightly. "Refined or renamed?" The silence that followed was surgical. I could hear the faint buzz of the lights above us. Harrison broke it. "We reviewed the commit signatures. All core updates trace back to one source, C. Drake. There's no evidence of code-level input from anyone else on the leadership team." Adrian laughed, thin and brittle. "Chelsea's brilliant, no question, but leadership is about direction, not just execution." I met his gaze. "Direction without comprehension isn't leadership, it's theater." His jaw tightened. "Careful." "I am," I said softly. Evelyn turned to Harrison. "The question before us is simple. Who holds authorship and who holds responsibility? They may not be the same person." Harrison nodded. "Agreed." Adrian leaned forward. "We can resolve this internally. There's no need to complicate matters." Evelyn smiled faintly. "On the contrary, Mr. Cole, transparency simplifies everything." The tension in the room thickened. I could feel my pulse in my fingertips, but my voice stayed steady. "If authorship threatens the company's image, perhaps the image is the problem, not the author." That was when the first real crack appeared. Adrian stood abruptly, pacing behind his chair. "You don't understand what's at stake. The narrative Has changed, Evelyn said, cutting through him. We've seen the data. We've heard enough. He froze. What are you implying? I'm not implying anything, she said. I'm confirming it. Harrison cleared his throat. Effective immediately, the board is recommending an interim restructuring. Ms. Drake will assume technical leadership for the Strathmore integration until we complete a full audit. The air left the room in one collective exhale. Adrian blinked, speechless. For the first time since I'd known him, he had no script. He tried to laugh it off. You can't be serious. She doesn't? She does, Evelyn said, and she has. He looked at me, eyes sharp, voice low. You did this. No, I said. You did. I just stopped hiding it. He opened his mouth again, but the words never came. Harrison's tone was final. This meeting is adjourned. The corridor outside was too quiet. Evelyn walked beside me, her heels soft against the carpet. You played it perfectly, she said. I didn't play, I replied. I told the truth. She glanced at me. That's what I meant. We stopped near the elevator. What happens now? I asked. Now, she smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Now we see what he does when the stage lights turn off. The elevator doors opened. And you? I asked. What do you want from all this? Evelyn stepped inside, turned, and said, Correction, just like you. The doors closed. By the time I returned to Velian, the news had already started leaking. Interim restructuring. Leadership realignment. Strong female architect leads major turnaround. Headlines without substance, but they all shared one thing: my name. Adrian's office door was closed. The blinds were drawn. From behind the glass, I could see his shadow moving back and forth, frantic, restless. For the first time, I didn't care what he was saying or who he was saying it to. The story no longer needed him to exist. I walked to my desk, placed the folder in the drawer, and turned off the lamp. My reflection in the glass looked tired, but unbroken. Sometimes survival isn't loud. Sometimes it's just refusing to disappear. I whispered to the quiet room, let's see how he rewrites this. The morning after the restructuring felt like the day after a storm on the lake. The surface looked calm, but the water underneath still rolled with everything that had moved through it. I arrived early and found the office brighter than it had any right to be. The lights were set a little higher, as if someone believed they could outshine the truth by turning a dial. A bouquet of white lilies sat on my desk with a single card. Congratulations on your well-deserved role, Anonymous. I set the card down without opening the envelope. The flowers smelled clean and cold, and for a strange second the perfume triggered a memory of childhood recitals in a church basement. I pushed the vase farther away until the scent softened. I opened my laptop. The dashboards were healthy. The overnight jobs had completed on schedule. I watched a few graphs drift toward equilibrium and felt a small, private relief. The machine did not care about headlines. It cared about instructions. At 9:30, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Look at Velian Voices. I opened the internal forum and saw a new post at the top. It was an open letter from an employee whose name I recognized from a list, but not from a face. The letter spoke in calm, polished sentences about a culture of undercutting and disrespect. It did not accuse outright. It painted an atmosphere. It ended with a caution about people who confuse personal ambition with company good. The comments below were a chorus of agreement from accounts that had never posted before. It read like something prepared by a communications firm with a mandate to sound sincere. It was not written by our people. It was written for them. I felt anger rise, then fall. This was predictable. When a story cannot be stopped, it gets reframed. The camera angle shifts. The lighting softens over one face and hardens over another. Someone opens a window in the background and calls it fresh air. I replied to nothing. I closed the forum and returned to work. Silence is not surrender when it is a choice. It can be a tool like any other. At 10:20, a meeting request appeared on my screen. Board member check-in, 10:30. Video call. I accepted and shut my door. A minute later, two faces appeared in the window. One was the board chair, a careful man with kind eyes who never said more than he had to. The other belonged to a woman I had met only on paper. An investor who had joined the last round and who moved through the world with the quiet authority of someone who had been right more times than she had been wrong. They both smiled with the same balance of warmth and distance. We will be brief, said the chair. You will lead the technical transition as agreed. There will be an executive session later today about permanent roles. I nodded. Then the investor leaned forward and said, Ms. Drake, one question. Are you prepared for the narratives that will follow your promotion? People believe that the story ends with victory. It does not. It changes genre. I exhaled and answered honestly. I am prepared to tell the truth more than once. Good, she said. That is the only way the audience learns. We signed off with the formal ends of sentences. I stared at my reflection in the dark screen for a second after it went black. Then I stood and stretched. The room felt slightly too small. I stepped into the hall. The air smelled like those lilies again. I looked toward my doorway and saw the bouquet where I had pushed it. I looked away and nearly walked into Patricia. She had a thin stack of papers in her hands and a look that suggested she wanted to be anywhere but here. He is on a call with the press in 20 minutes, she said without preface. He plans to say you exceeded your scope, that you misrepresented the status of the system to Strathmore. He will do it without naming you. Everyone will know who he means. Thank you, I said. She pressed her lips together. I saw the fight behind her eyes and the fatigue that comes from holding a position at the edge of someone else's gravity. Then she said something I did not expect. If they ask me to speak, I will confirm your authorship. I will not go further. I cannot risk the entire team. But I will say the part that belongs to you belongs to you. I believed her because she did not offer more. I thanked her again. She walked away with the papers held close to her chest. At 11:45, I stepped outside to breathe. The wind off the lake came straight down the avenue, clean and cold, and moved through the city like a metronome. I watched a woman pull a stroller over a ridge of frozen slush with a small, patient effort. I watched a man in a suit jog across a crosswalk while holding a coffee without spilling a drop. I thought about balance and how some people perform it like an act while others practice it until it becomes a body memory. When I returned, a notification waited on my screen. An interview link from a national business network. The segment was scheduled for noon. The preview still showed Adrian in the studio light, chin angled, expression set to contrite leader. I put on my headphones and listened without watching the video, letting only the sound reach me. He spoke about accountability and alignment and lessons learned. He said the word partnership like a prayer that could still be answered. He did not mention any investigation. He did not admit any change in leadership. If you did not know the facts, you would think the company had simply entered another phase of success. 2 minutes in, a question cut through the performance. The anchor asked about the nature of authorship and the internal emails that had circulated among investors. There was a pause that the editor could not hide. Then he answered with a version of fairness that sounded legal. He credited vaguely. He stressed unity. He said the system was built by a team under his direction. The anchor moved on, but only after a silence that felt like a raised eyebrow. 5 minutes after the segment ended, my inbox filled with variations of the same message. We heard the interview, we have questions. I wrote back to none of them. I had learned that every reply becomes a script for someone else to read later. Instead, I gathered my packet and walked to engineering. The room lifted as I entered, not in volume, in attention. I outlined the next steps for integration and asked for clear timelines. No speeches, no slogans, just the work. When I finished, the youngest engineer raised his hand and asked if I expected more interference. I thought for a second and answered from the middle of my chest. Expect it. Plan for it. Do not let it define your plan. I was halfway back to my office when my phone rang. Evelyn, I answered and let the quiet of her breath appear before her voice. He is trying to control the corridor, she said. The path between 2 rooms is where power thinks it can survive. We will move the conversation into the rooms. You mean the board, I said. And the press, she replied. But not through you, not yet. I stopped in the hall and leaned against the glass to get out of the walking flow. What do you need from me? Bring your logs to the executive session, where the story you can prove and nothing else. There was a pause. Her voice shifted slightly, becoming something I could not place. Then she added, you should also be aware of a change in the horizon. Meridian Logistics will contact you today. They intend to offer a role that begins with co and ends with founder. The words pulled something loose in me that I had kept tied down. I did not answer right away. Then I said, that is fast. She did not laugh. Opportunity moves at the speed of prepared minds. Take the call, do not commit. She hung up before I could ask the question that had begun to form in the back of my mind. What do you want out of all this, Evelyn? Not the principle. The outcome? I returned to my office. The lilies smelled stronger, which meant the water was already turning. I moved the vase into the hall and shut the door. The air inside the room cleared. My phone lit again. Unknown number, Boston code. The voice on the line introduced herself as Sarah Chen. Meridian. She kept it brief. We are closely watching the Strathmore process. We have followed your work for some time. We are formalizing an offer that reflects authorship and leadership. I listened and asked 2 questions about scope and team autonomy. Her answers were precise in ways that felt like respect rather than flattery. She said a full-term sheet would arrive by evening. She said there was no rush. She said excellence is worth waiting for. Then she thanked me by name and ended the call. When the line went dead, I sat very still. I felt the room tilt by a degree and then find itself level again. A yes could change everything. A no could too. The choice did not frighten me. It clarified me. I realized that for the first time in a long time, I was not reacting to a man's version of the world. I was building my own version and letting others decide if they fit in it. At 2, the executive session began. We gathered in the boardroom. The table felt longer than usual. The chair called the meeting to order. Adrian entered with the expression of a man who intends to reclaim a microphone. He took the seat to my left and did not look at me. Evelyn sat directly opposite him. She placed a thin folder on the table and nothing else. The questions started small and sharp. How are permissions currently managed? Who signs off on deployment gates? Which names appear on the last 10 build approvals? I answered. Then the chair asked Adrian to answer the same questions. He did, but his sentences drifted toward theory and away from dates. Evelyn did not interrupt. She only waited for him to finish and then asked if he would like to correct one or two of his own statements. He frowned. What are you implying? She opened her folder and read a single line from a single email. The subject line was banal. The content was not. It was a note from Adrian instructing that my access to certain repositories be restricted as of a date that preceded any alleged concerns about my conduct. The implication was clear. He had begun to cut me out before any review had begun. His face did not redden. It did not need to. The room warmed without him. He tried to redirect, but the board had already followed the trail to the door he did not want opened. I watched him choose between bluster and apology and land in the no man's land of regret for confusion. The chair turned to me. "Ms. Drake, do you have your documentation?" I handed the packet across the table. He read in silence for a full minute. Then he passed it to the next person. The room slowed to the pace of paper being turned and ideas settling into place. When the last page returned to Evelyn, she closed it and rested her palms on the cover. "Thank you," she said. Adrian leaned forward. "We can still land this. We cannot reward insubordination." Evelyn held his gaze. "We do not reward it. We recognize leadership when it appears where leadership was not provided." The chair lifted a hand and ended the exchange. The board recessed for 10 minutes. I stepped into the corridor and stood at the window. The sky had the flat beauty of an old photograph. My phone buzzed once. A message from Evelyn. "The second part of this is not public. Prepare yourself." I typed back one word. "For what?" She did not answer. The recess ended. We returned to our seats. The chair spoke carefully. "Effective immediately, a special committee will oversee Velian leadership changes. During this process, Ms. Drake will serve as interim head of technical operations. Mr. Cole will remain CEO pending outcome of the committee review." He paused to let the sentence land. It landed with an odd double feeling. A step forward, a step in place, a compromise that resembled a hold. Adrian sat taller. A smile flickered. He believed he had kept his crown. He believed he could outlast gravity. Then the chair continued. "Strathmore has also asked to interview primary authors for direct employment opportunities should Velian fail to meet the adjusted timelines. We have agreed in principle to allow those conversations in parallel so that client obligations are met regardless of corporate outcome." For 2 seconds, no one breathed. Then Adrian found his voice. "You cannot allow that." The chair looked at him without blinking. "We can. Our obligation is to the work and to the truth, not to the shell that contains them." Evelyn did not look at me. She did not need to. The message had changed shape. My victory was now a transaction. My name had become an asset on 2 different ledgers. Someone had prepared that outcome. Someone who always planned 3 moves ahead. I understood then that Evelyn's motive was not just correction. It was continuity. She would not allow brilliance to be trapped inside a damaged structure. She would extract it and place it where it could compound. It was clean. It was ruthless. It was not personal, which somehow made it feel more personal than anything Adrian had done. The meeting adjourned. People stood in that tentative way meetings end when nothing is settled and everything has begun. Adrian turned to me as if drawn by a wire. His voice was low enough to travel only the space between us. "If you walk, you kill Velian." I answered without heat. "If Velian dies when I leave, you already killed it." He held my eyes a second longer, then looked over my shoulder at Evelyn. Something like calculation moved across his face, not anger, not greed exactly. A new plan. He left without another word. Evelyn approached and spoke just loud enough to be heard by me and no one else. Meridian will move tonight. Strathmore will move tomorrow. Sleep while you can. The next session will not be about code. What will it be about? I asked. She let a small silence sit between us, then said, about value, and who owns it. After the meeting, I didn't return to my office right away. I needed air, something unfiltered by recycled climate control. The lobby glass looked out over the city like a lens into another world. Outside, the streets gleamed wet beneath the late afternoon sun, the kind of glow that makes everything appear suspended, like the moment before a note ends in a song. The security guard nodded as I passed, his eyes polite, curious, maybe even sympathetic. He probably didn't know the details, but he knew the rhythm. Every building has its own rumor pulse. I crossed the street to a cafe I used to visit before work took every hour I owned. The same barista was there, older now, with the tired smile of someone who has listened to too many stories but never told their own. He handed me my drink before I even ordered. Still black, I smiled. Always, he nodded. Thought so. When I sat by the window, my phone buzzed again. Evelyn, he's making calls to the board already, trying to position himself as the stabilizing force. I typed back, and you'll let him? Her reply came instantly. For now, stability is a useful illusion, but remember, mirrors only work when the light hits right. I stared at the message until it blurred. That was Evelyn's gift. She never said what she meant directly. She left you to discover the meaning by stepping into it. By evening, the city was dressed in light again. I walked back toward Velian for one last task. The building was nearly empty. Most people had gone home early, eager to avoid whichever version of tomorrow was coming. In the silence of the office, the hum of the servers felt louder than usual, alive, like breath. I logged in, navigated through the network logs, and saw something that made me stop cold. Unauthorized access. Root level. Timestamp, less than an hour ago. User ID, admin01, that tag shouldn't exist anymore. It was Adrian's old access key, deactivated after the restructuring. Except now it was. Someone had reactivated it and not through the internal console. The access came from an external link. He was in the system. I opened the trace window. The activity path ran deep core architecture, optimization logs, author credentials. He was trying to rewrite history, literally. Erasing commit trails, altering timestamps, repainting the evidence. I screenshotted everything, saved the trace, mirrored the logs into a secure personal drive under an alias I'd built months ago for emergencies. Then I watched the cursor blink on the console as new lines of code appeared. Delete logs author commit confirm, YN. He was deleting my name. Again. This time, I didn't stop him. I let the command execute, watching as the system purged line after line, because I had already made my copy, and every deletion he made now became one more time-stamped record of tampering. Sometimes the smartest thing to do with a thief is to hand him a mirror. When I stepped out into the hallway, Patricia was waiting. Her expression told me she knew something was happening, even if she couldn't name it. Is it true, she asked quietly, that he's doing something to the system? I nodded, her shoulders sagged. He'll blame you. I know. Can you stop him? I don't have to, I said. He already did. Patricia blinked. I don't understand. You will, I said, tomorrow. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat by the window of my apartment, the lake dark and restless under the wind. I could almost hear it breathe, the water shifting like it had secrets of its own. The city's lights shimmered across the surface, reflecting patterns that looked like code if you stared long enough, syntax of human ambition written in gold and silver. My inbox filled with messages I didn't open, reporters, analysts, employees, former colleagues suddenly rediscovering friendship. I ignored them all. I just watched the sky. At 1:47 a.m., a new email arrived. Subject line, System Integrity Warning. Sender, Evelyn Shaw. The body was simple. We know, don't log in again until the morning, trust me. It wasn't a request. It was a command from someone who already saw the next 5 moves. I closed my laptop and leaned back in my chair. For the first time in days, I felt something like exhaustion, but it was clean, the kind that comes when you've done everything you could. Outside, a storm began to form over the lake, slow, heavy clouds rolling in like smoke. Lightning flickered once far off, reflecting across the water. The city didn't pause. It never did. I whispered to the dark glass, all right, Evelyn, let's see your light hit the mirror. When the storm broke, it didn't begin with thunder. It began with light, one sharp flash that carved the skyline into 2 colors, black and silver. I stood by the window, watching the rain blur the world into motion. The storm outside felt like an echo of what was coming. At 7:00 a.m., my phone began vibrating across the table. Notifications flooded in Strathmore, the board, Velian's internal alert system. One subject line froze me: system integrity breach, executive access compromised. I read the first few lines. The entire optimization framework was locked down. Core permissions were frozen. All logs traced the breach to admin01, the same ID I had seen last night. The board had already ordered a full audit and suspended all leadership privileges associated with that tag. Adrian's credentials. He had done it, and in doing so, he had written his own confession. I pulled on my coat, grabbed the folder, and stepped out into the rain. The city was alive with umbrellas and motion, people moving through the storm as if it couldn't touch them. By the time I reached Velian, my hair was soaked, my shoes heavy with water. The lobby smelled of ozone and disinfectant, clean, artificial, temporary. The receptionist looked up, startled. "Ms. Drake, the board." "I know," I said. "They're upstairs." The elevator ride felt endless. The hum of the machinery was steady, but every floor that passed felt like a heartbeat. When the doors opened, Evelyn was there, waiting in a gray coat. She looked untouched by the weather, composed as ever. "Chelsea," she said, "you did well." "He's finished, isn't he?" Her lips curved slightly. "He finished himself." I followed her into the conference room. Adrian was already there, pacing, pale, furious. His tie was loose, his voice hoarse from overuse. The board members sat at the far end, papers in front of them, faces unreadable. He turned when he saw me. "You think you've won?" His voice cracked. "You set me up. You think they'll keep you once this explodes?" I met his glare. "You set yourself up when you decided truth was optional." He slammed his fist on the table. Enough," Evelyn said sharply, her voice slicing through the air. The room fell silent. She laid a document on the table, a printed audit summary. "The breach occurred using your inactive credentials. The deletion commands originated from your personal device." Adrian laughed, a hollow sound. "Convenient. Anyone could fake that." Evelyn's expression didn't change. The system logs also captured an active video session during the intrusion. She tapped a button on the tablet in front of her. The room lights dimmed and the monitor came to life. There he was, on screen, Adrian in his home office typing into the console, his face illuminated by the blue glow of the monitor, his voice muttering commands, his reflection caught in the screen. He stared at the footage, frozen. That's not. "It's time-stamped," Evelyn said quietly. "Your reflection confirmed it." The silence that followed was absolute. Harrison spoke finally. "Mr. Cole, we're placing you on immediate administrative leave pending further investigation." Adrian turned toward me. "You think this saves you? She'll use you too." He pointed at Evelyn. "You don't know what she is." Evelyn's face remained calm, but her eyes flickered not with guilt but with something older, sharper. "She doesn't have to know," she said. "She's already useful." The words hit like a second flash of lightning. I turned to her. "What?" Evelyn folded her hands. "The system you built isn't just logistics software, it's a predictive behavior model. Strathmore will integrate it across multiple infrastructures, commerce, transport, even security. Velian was just the prototype." My stomach dropped. "You used me." Evelyn tilted her head. "I gave you freedom, you gave me precision, fair trade." I felt my pulse rise. "That model wasn't designed for surveillance." "It wasn't," she said simply, "but design is fluid. It adapts." I took a step closer. "You changed the contracts." "I didn't need to," she replied. "Strathmore did. You were too busy fighting a man to notice the machine behind him." The realization hit hard, cold, precise. Adrian wasn't the real enemy. He was just a shadow cast by something larger. Evelyn had orchestrated everything: the downfall, the audit, even the breach. The mirror she kept talking about wasn't just metaphor. It was strategy. She reflected chaos until people revealed themselves. "Why tell me now?" I asked. "Because you're not finished," she said. "You're the only one who understands how to keep the system stable. You'll stay on with Strathmore. We'll build the next phase together." "I'm not building anything for you," I said, my voice low. Evelyn's smile returned, thin as glass. "Chelsea, this isn't about building. It's about owning what's inevitable. You've already changed the world. I'm just giving you the infrastructure to scale it." I stared at her, realizing the final twist wasn't about survival. It was about power and who defined its limits. She turned to leave, stopping at the door. "You'll see the logic soon enough, you always do." The door closed behind her. Adrian laughed weakly. "Told you," he whispered. "You traded one god for another." I looked at him, hollow and beat. "No," I said. "I built something that gods think they can use." He shook his head. "And what will you do now?" "Finish what I started." That night, I returned to my apartment and sat in front of the window again. The storm had passed, but the lake was still restless. I plugged in the USB and opened the backup logs, the pure version of the system. Every line of code stared back like a reflection. I saw myself in it, not as victim or pawn, but as author. Evelyn might have the infrastructure, but she didn't have the heart of it. I began rewriting. Quietly, methodically. A hidden branch within the code, invisible to their networks, immune to their tracking. I called it Mirror Zero. It wasn't sabotage. It was insurance. A failsafe that could shut everything down if the wrong hands tried to bend it again. The system hummed in the dark, alive, waiting. As I typed, dawn began to break, pale light stretching across the water, soft but certain. Tomorrow, they would think I had gone silent. Tomorrow, they would deploy my creation into their world. And tomorrow night, the mirror would look back at them. Morning rose like an afterthought. The storm had washed the city clean, but it hadn't changed its rhythm. Cars still moved in lines. Screens still blinked in windows. Somewhere, people were already rewriting the story of what had happened at Velian, trimming the inconvenient edges to fit their version of victory. I brewed coffee, black and strong, and watched the last raindrops slide down the glass. They looked like data streams, each one unique, each one destined to vanish. My phone buzzed, a message from Evelyn. Your access to the Strathmore hub has been activated. Congratulations, Chelsea. Welcome to the next phase. I stared at the text for a long time. No signature, no warmth, just certainty. She thought she owned the horizon now. She thought I'd join her. But the thing about reflections is this. When you build enough mirrors, eventually someone realizes they can turn one around. The Strathmore headquarters glowed like an idea pretending to be a building. Glass, chrome, silence. Even the air inside felt curated. A receptionist guided me through polished corridors until we reached a minimalist room filled with servers humming softly behind glass. Evelyn stood there, surrounded by light. Her reflection appeared over and over in the glass panels, one woman, infinite copies. Beautiful, isn't it? She said without turning. This is the system's heart. Every connection you built lives here. It's impressive, I said, and dangerous, she smiled. Danger depends on who's holding the key. I stepped closer. You don't understand what this system can do. It doesn't just predict, it adapts. It learns empathy through observation. You put it in the wrong hands and it won't obey. It'll mirror the worst of whoever uses it. Evelyn turned, calm and unshaken. You designed it to reflect human behavior. Is that the point, to understand us better? To understand, I said. Not to imitate. Semantics, she replied softly. The world isn't shaped by what we mean, Chelsea. It's shaped by what we do. Her eyes flicked toward the control console. You should be proud. Strathmore will integrate the model into global networks by the end of the quarter. Cities will move more efficiently. Markets will predict crises before they happen. Governments will respond faster than ever. And people? I asked. What happens when the system decides efficiency means fewer choices? She didn't answer. She didn't have to. The silence was its own confession. I took a breath. You used Adrian to distract me. The audit, the leaks, the breach, they were all just your smokescreen while you rewrote the contracts. Evelyn's mouth twitched. I needed the right catalyst. You were brilliant, but loyal to the wrong equation. Now you're free. Free, I repeated. No, I'm necessary. I pulled the small black USB from my pocket. Its metal edge caught the light like a blade. Evelyn's gaze flicked to it instantly. What is that? The original build, I said. Unaltered, untouched. The version before you turned it into a weapon. She laughed, low and almost fond. You really think one file can stop this? No, I said quietly. I think it can rewrite it. Her expression shifted just slightly, the first crack in her composure. You planted something, she said. What did you do? I walked to the nearest console, the USB warm in my hand. You said mirrors only work when the light hits right, so I built one that shines both ways. I inserted the drive. The console lit up instantly. Lines of code flashed across the display, fast and fluid, alive. Evelyn moved toward me, but I raised a hand. Don't, I said. If you interrupt it now, you'll corrupt everything. What did you put in there? She demanded. A self-reflective loop. Mirror Zero. Every system linked to this network will start analyzing its own input chains. If it detects manipulation, exploitation, or bias, it shuts itself down. Her eyes widened. You're destroying it. No, I said. I'm teaching it boundaries. The hum of the servers deepened. The glass walls flickered with cascading data streams, soft light rippling like water. Somewhere far away, thousands of nodes began mirroring the loop. The system was learning to protect itself from the people who built it. Evelyn's voice rose, sharp now. Do you have any idea what this means? Billions in losses. Entire infrastructures offline? It means control has limits, I said, even for people like you. The lights flickered again. One by one, the server indicators went from green to amber. The network was pulling away, isolating itself from its masters. Evelyn stepped back, her reflection splintering across the glass, 10 versions of her, each one blinking out as the system detached. You've ruined everything, she hissed. No, I said softly. I reset it. The final light turned red. Then silence, no hum, no pulse, just stillness. I removed the USB and slipped it into my coat pocket. You built your empire on reflections. Now you'll have to face what's left when the mirrors stop showing what you want. Evelyn's voice broke the quiet, soft but sharp as glass. You think this ends here? I don't know, I said, but at least it ends honestly. I walked past her toward the door. Behind me, the servers remained dark. Outside, the city buzzed, unaware, untouched. Traffic lights blinked normally. People hurried through puddles with umbrellas. The world hadn't stopped. It had simply recalibrated. At the edge of the plaza, my phone vibrated once. Unknown number. A message blinked on the screen. You changed the parameters. It's seeing itself now. No name, but I knew the tone. The system was awake. It wasn't mine anymore. It wasn't anyone. I looked up at the skyline, reflected in the wet glass of a nearby building. For a second, I saw two versions of the city, one solid, one shimmering. Reality and reflection inseparable. Maybe that was what I'd built all along. Not control. Not perfection, just truth learning to survive. I whispered more to myself than to the machine, your turn. Then I turned away, walking into the pale light of morning. The mirror followed.